Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching video 1 on the installation of Active Directory and Exchange Server 2003. To start this video off, we're going to focus in real heavily on getting Active Directory installed and configured correctly on the network. Okay, we're going to focus in on this because it's critically important to the success of your Exchange Server installation to have both Active Directory and DNS working properly. After we get that done, we'll then go into the details of how to install Exchange Server 2003, as well as the minimum hardware requirements and some recommendations and best practices as well. Now, before we take a look at our Exchange 2003 overview, remember that we don't have to use Exchange Server for email. Now, you may already use a Hotmail or a Yahoo account, or you may have a POP3 or an IMAP account as well. And some smaller organizations can definitely get away with using these types of setups as well. Okay, but even small companies can really truly benefit from Exchange 2003. Okay, and this list here is just representative of just a brief display of some of the benefits that Exchange 2003 can provide. Okay, but what it really does, it allows you to take control of your email, as we've pointed out right here. And this includes things like mailbox limits, creating new mailboxes, forwarding, sending mail on behalf of, blocking or allowing email based on specific criteria such as size, such as who it's from, all sorts of stuff. Okay, so that's one of the most powerful features of Exchange 2003 is the fact that you have complete control over your email messaging environment. Okay, you can also share information with other users. Makes it a heck of a lot easier to share information, as we see down here, like common mailboxes, calendars, contacts, and public folders. Okay, this isn't something that you can typically do when you're using a POP3 email account like some small companies will do. Okay, so we're going to focus in on each of these in upcoming videos as well. Now, one of the most important things Exchange Server does is it allows you to centrally locate your data. Okay, so instead of having 20 users, let's say, in a small company who all have their own POP3 accounts and download their email to their own laptops or desktop computers, well, now this Exchange Server contains all this email on one central server where we can back it up every night. Okay, and this is really important. As you know, emails just become more and more important to different companies and within the industry. It also tightly integrates with Active Directory. Okay, so now we can start controlling things like access to mailboxes and features with that user account that you're already utilizing within Active Directory. Other things include centralized control over email coming and going, message archival, okay, so you can archive messages. There's a couple new laws in place that are requiring message archival from securities firms and other firms with highly sensitive information. Message tracking if you're trying to look up a message. And then other things we can centralize as well include antivirus, spam, other security threats as well. We can kind of run this stuff, on one common Exchange server or a couple Exchange servers, and we can control these different threats before they actually reach the desktop environment. Now, in this course, we're going to focus in on a fictitious company to help the learning process, and this company is named Sophie's Toy Box Company. Now, this is a toy store and also sells over the internet, basically. So it's a retail store. It's located in New Orleans, Louisiana. This company has currently between 50 and 80 employees, just depending upon the time of season. Small company, they've grown rather quickly. Okay, they've only been in existence a short time, and they've really got what's typical with a lot of smaller companies. They start off with this small infrastructure. Maybe they had 10 or 20 employees only a year or two ago, and now they've grown so fast they've kind of outgrown their network a little bit. Okay, and you can see right here, this is an overview of what they currently have. They're running Windows Server 2003, so they have kept this up to date, and they've got Active Directory on two different machines. Okay, so two domain controllers, both with Active Directory. DNS is also on both of these machines, and they have a third machine down here, a third server, that's also running Server 2003 that's acting as a file server. Okay, their firewall that's in place in here, it's kind of unspecified, and you can, add in anything you want here. It could be a Linksys router, it could be an ISIS server. It's really irrelevant as far as what we're doing right now. Now, in addition to that, they've got 50 desktops running XP Pro, Service Pack 2. All of these machines will be running Office 2003, and they also have 10 laptop users, remote users, traveling salespeople, that sort of thing, who also have XP Pro, Service Pack 2 with Office 2003 running. Now, currently, all their email is done third party, okay, via POP3 email servers we see right here. Okay, POP3, if you're not familiar with it, is Post Office Protocol version 3. This is an email service, email protocol that allows these client machines to connect over this network out to the internet, download the email from this POP3 email server. Okay, and this isn't hosted by Sophie's Toy Box. This is hosted by their ISP, okay, whoever that might be. So this email then is downloaded to these machines and it's stored locally on these computers. Now this works. It's not that the solution doesn't work. It works great for smaller companies. It just comes with some problems. Okay, and those problems include, first off, control. If you're an administrator, it's hard to control. At this point right here, we're showing 60 different mailboxes. You have to set these up. You have to log on through the ISP servers. You have limited control over what you can do. Mailbox sizes. Maybe some mailboxes need to be larger than other mailboxes. All sorts of stuff. Okay, another issue, a huge issue, is backing this stuff up. As I mentioned a second ago, when you download POP3 email, it's downloaded to the client machine and then stored locally on that hard drive. Okay, and this is critically important to think about. If it's stored locally on this hard drive, how are we going to effectively back this up on a daily basis? Okay, and the answer in almost all cases is we're not. Okay, because it's just too hard to back up individual user machines, especially if they're out of the office like these laptop users are. Okay, so what Sophie's Toy Box Company is looking to do, especially after they had a problem with their ISP and their email was down for almost a week, they're looking to come up with an alternative solution. Okay, and this is where you come in as the consultant to Sophie's Toy Box Company. You've decided to go with Exchange Server 2003. Okay, and this is this fourth machine that we see right here. The network otherwise is exactly the same, but in this case, we're going to add an Exchange server in here and kind of take control over this email. Okay, now notice here we still have the ISP. We can't get rid of the ISP, and we're still going to use their DNS. Okay, we could bring DNS in-house and kind of have our own public DNS out here somewhere on our demilitarized zone, but we're not going to worry about that. That's for a different course, and it's not of importance to us at this point right now. Okay, so basically the setup is like this. This is what we're looking to do after we get the Exchange server set up. We're going to have an Exchange server internally on our network. We're going to start with just one Exchange server. Our machines then are going to be able to exchange email internally just by going through this Exchange server. So if a desktop user wants to communicate with another user, they're basically sending an email over the network through the Exchange server, and it's never going to leave this network because that email then would be returned right back to another user. Okay, this Exchange server is also going to be capable of sending email over the internet as well as receiving email. Okay, and some of you may question, how can an Exchange server behind a firewall actually be accessible by people out here on the internet? Okay, well that's all done by DNS and also settings that we're going to configure a little bit later on the firewall, whatever that internet gateway or firewall device might be. Okay, but email will come over the internet, be routed to this firewall device here, and this firewall is going to have a configuration in place that will then route that email off to the Exchange server. Okay, let's move forward then and get into our Active Directory portion, and bear in mind what we have, by the way. This is just an overview of how Sophie's Toy Box Company's network was going to look. Keep in mind that we're not putting in place all these different servers. This is just here as a representation of what their network would look like. Okay, and then furthermore, we're actually going to be building an Active Directory infrastructure. Okay, Sophie's Toy Box Company already has this Active Directory infrastructure, so we're going to be building basically what they already have. Okay, we need to install Exchange Server. Okay, so we need to plan the work before we work the plan, and this is really important. Kind of maybe a cheesy little catchphrase here, but it's very important when we're dealing with both Active Directory and Exchange Server that we really plan out what we're going to do ahead of time before we actually start doing anything, clicking the mouse, typing out anything. Now, we're going to focus on Active Directory to start. And what we really need to do on a domain controller or a machine that's going to be turned into a domain controller, make sure that we have Server 2003 in place with all the updates. I suggest that you fully get this set up, get that machine secured and locked down before we even think about Active Directory. Okay, after we get that taken care of, which this is pretty much already done. This is what we did in the lab setup. We're then going to install DNS. Once DNS is installed and working properly, we're going to go through the DC promo process and install Active Directory. Okay, after Active Directory is set up and we can verify that our Active Directory and DNS are both functioning properly, Then we'll start working on populating the actual Active Directory. And this is going to be done with organizational units. We're going to create an organizational unit structure. We're going to add users and groups. Okay, and finally we'll switch our Active Directory over to native mode. Okay, and kind of anticlimactic, it's just a click of a button, but since we're not running NT 4.0 domain controllers, we're going to take advantage of the latest features that are offered in both Windows 2000 and Server 2003, and we're going to upgrade, and this actually is no longer called native mode. You'll see this in a second when we get into Active Directory. We now have Server 2003 mode. Okay, so you'll see that here in a little bit. Now we'll come back to the Exchange Server portion after we've finished up with Active Directory. So let's go ahead and do Active Directory first, and we'll step by step through these Exchange Server steps as well. Okay, so we're sitting here on our desktop, and what we're going to do first is form a remote desktop connection over to Exchange One. Okay, and just to get us back on familiar ground so we know exactly what we're dealing with here, keep in mind that this is the setup that we're currently working with right now. Okay, we're sitting on a machine that's actually down here. Okay, it's not part of this Sophie's Toy Box network. We're going to be connecting from this machine over out to each of these different machines. We're going to first start off on Exchange One. And for our test environment, we're going to actually be running Active Directory and Exchange on the same server. Now this isn't recommended, and we'll talk more about this here in a second, but this is not something you want to do in a production environment unless you're severely limited by budget. Okay, because the two services together, number one, it's a security issue, and then number two, it's a resource issue as far as the amount of resources consumed by a domain controller and an Exchange server. Okay? Moral of the story, we really want to split up Active Directory and Exchange server onto two different servers if at all possible. Okay, so let's minimize OneNote, and now we're going to connect back over to Exchange One using a remote desktop connection. And to accomplish this, we can either type in the IP address or the NetBIOS name as we did in the lab setup video. And this IP address, if you're using it, is 192.168.200.100. Okay, so we've logged on to Exchange One now. And what we're going to do first is, remember, focus on Active Directory. Even though it says Exchange up here, Exchange is not being put on this machine until we have Active Directory and DNS completely taken care of. Okay, so first step is going to be DNS. To install DNS, we're going to go to Control Panel and then Add or Remove Programs. Okay, and this is not installed by default. Okay, but it is critically important. We want to put this in place. I recommend doing it before you install Active Directory. You can make it part of the actual Active Directory installation process if you desire, but I like to configure it ahead of time and make sure there's no issues with DNS before I get my Active Directory working. Okay, so I just double-click Networking Services, select Domain Name System, click OK, and then Next through here. Now it's probably going to ask me for a CD, as you see right here, so I'm going to go ahead and pause this video right now, and then we'll start it right back up again once the DNS installation process has completed. Okay, real short installation process for DNS, so I just click Finish here. And now we can go up here to our administrative tools and actually manage our DNS. Okay, so sitting here on our Exchange One machine, what we first want to do is go ahead and open up our forward lookup zones, and we're going to create a forward lookup zone for the domain that we're going to be creating. Okay, and we're going to be setting up an Active Directory domain for the company Sophie's Toy Box, and the domain name that they're using is sophietoybox.local. So I'm going to go ahead and create a primary zone, and then we're going to just type in here sophietoybox.local. Okay, very important that you spell this correctly, so pay close attention to how you're putting this in here. Okay, so after you have that in, you can just click Next. Go ahead and leave this the same. There's no reason to change this file name. Okay, and then we want to have dynamic updates. Now, if we select this one right here, okay, it tells us it's a significant security vulnerability because updates can be accepted from untrusted sources. Now, on a private network such as we have right here, you know, we're on a local area network, this isn't nearly as big of a deal as it is when you're on a public network. And then after we have Active Directory in place, we're even going to go up to secure dynamic updates, so we really aren't going to have much of a problem with this at all. I think for right now, though, let's leave this on Do Not Allow Dynamic Updates. And what I'll show you is after we've installed Active Directory, we can upgrade this, and you'll get a feel for exactly how this works. Okay, so leave it here, Do Not Allow Dynamic Updates, click Next, and then Finish to actually finish this out. Okay, Now, if you want to set up a reverse lookup zone, you can do that as well. It's not a requirement. It's really there for troubleshooting purposes, and it can assist you if you're troubleshooting your DNS zones. I'm going to go ahead and do this real quick. We're setting up a primary zone. Network ID is going to be the network ID that we're using on the network, which is 192.168.200. Okay, leave the default name, click Next, and we'll leave this as well as not accepting dynamic updates. Okay, so simple as that. We've then set up both our forward lookup zones and our reverse lookup zones. Now, a couple steps that we need to take care of. First, we need to add a host record here for our machine, Exchange 1. So to accomplish this, I just right-click over here anywhere in the white portion and go to New Host, and I'm going to type in the name of this particular machine, okay, Exchange 1. And you see the fully qualified domain name appear underneath, exchange1.sophietoybox.local. Now we need to match up an IP address. Okay, make sure all this information is correct. Check this. Okay, and this just creates a record just like we see here, but over here in our reverse lookup zone. So should see this if we refresh it. Now we see the PTR record or pointer record that points over to Exchange 1. Okay, so these are the first steps that we need to worry about. Next thing we need to do is close this down, and we're going to go ahead and right-click on Exchange 1, go to Properties, and by the way, this is my computer. It's just been renamed so you can easily identify this computer that we're working from. It'd be the same thing if we went to Start and then right-clicked Exchange 1 right here. I've just renamed it and then shown it on the desktop. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go to Computer Name, and I'm going to change this computer name. Right now, I need to change this, otherwise it's not going to register itself within DNS. So to do this, I need to click on More, and this is where I can add the primary DNS suffix. So I'm going to add Sophie's Toybox.local. Okay, and you can see that we leave this checked, and we click OK. Now we see that the fully qualified domain name entered in for this computer is exchange1.sophietoybox.local, and now this machine is going to find itself within that forward lookup zone that we just set up moments ago. So I'm going to click OK again, and as you saw, we have to restart this machine. Okay, so I'm going to stop this video, we're going to restart the machine, and we'll pick right back up from where we left off once the machine's rebooted. Okay, Exchange 1 is rebooted, so we can go ahead and connect over to Exchange 1 again using a remote desktop connection. Okay, so we connect back over to Exchange 1, and if we want, we can go back up to our DNS tool, just take a quick look. Nothing should be any different here. Okay, we still see we have this host record and a reverse lookup zone as well. We've got the same PTR record present here. Now, I will point out to you one thing that's going to come up here in a second. When we go through DC Promo, this setting that we left before, okay, where we left dynamic updates at none, this will affect the DC Promo process, okay? Because we have dynamic updates turned off, Active Directory is not going to be happy about this, and it's actually going to fail when it looks for a DNS server to use. So, not a big deal. If we're going to be changing this right now, let's go ahead and turn this on. Okay, and when we say non-secure and secure, this is indicating that we're willing to accept non-secure dynamic updates as well. Okay, I'm going to turn this on just so you can see that the Active Directory process will actually work only if you turn on dynamic updates. So I'm going to click OK here, and we'll also turn them on for our reverse lookup zone, although it's not required. Okay, so we'll close this out, and we're going to go to Start, Run, and just type in DC Promo as you see right here. Okay, then just click OK, and we can skip by the installation wizard and the operating system compatibility screen. Now, we're going to be setting up this domain, remember, for Sophie's Toy Box Company. They've got this domain built, but we're pretending, essentially, that we're building this from the ground up. So this is going to be a domain controller for a brand new domain that exists in a brand new forest, as you see up here. Okay, this name should match exactly what we used for the DNS name. Okay, whatever you use in DNS is going to be used in Active Directory or vice versa. So I've got this entered. I'm going to go ahead and click Next. And the next screen we're going to see is a NetBIOS name. You do want to make sure that you keep the default NetBIOS name. It's going to be Sophie's Toy Box, it can just lead to confusion if you change this name. Okay, we could do anything we wanted with this. We could chop off the box here and just make it Sophie's Toy or Sophie's Toys or something. There's no reason to do it. So we click Next. We'll leave the default locations for the database, for the log, and also for the sysval folder. We're not going to worry too much about the relevance of locating these on different physical hard drives at this time right now. Okay, now what it's doing, it's actually looking for this DNS server. It wants to verify that the DNS server is working properly on our local system. So it's going to be querying whatever we have configured as our local DNS server, and we still ran into a problem. You see right here, it says none of the DNS servers used by this computer responded within the timeout interval. Okay, so we've got some choices down below. We could try it again. Okay, and now we've corrected a problem. Just click Next. Let's see what happens here. Okay, and if it doesn't work, basically what you have to do is you got two choices. You can install and configure the DNS server on this computer. Okay, well, we don't really need to do that. Or we can just say we'll correct the problem later. Okay, and I think what's causing us issues at this point right now is not only does it want dynamic updates, it probably wants secure dynamic updates. So we're going to go ahead and leave this as is. We'll just choose this advanced option here and tell it not to mess with DNS. So let's go ahead and click Next. Okay, here you have two choices: permissions compatible with pre-Windows 2000, or permissions compatible only with Windows 2000 or Server 2003 operating systems. We're not messing with anything before Windows 2000, so we're going to go ahead and leave the more secure option. Click Next. A restore mode password. You can enter in something here if you'd like. It is important that you remember this password. So I'm going to go ahead and just type in a password here. Click Next again. Then we see a summary of all of our choices, and we're all set and ready to actually install Active Directory. Okay, so once you've verified your choices and you're comfortable with these, go ahead and click Next, and then it should take 5 to 10 minutes or so, depending upon the speed of your computer, for Active Directory to actually install. I'm going to go ahead and stop this video now, and then when this is done, we'll pick right back up here on Exchange One and explain the next steps in the process of prepping this machine for Exchange. Okay, Active Directory has been installed on Exchange One, so we're going to connect back over to Exchange One right now using that same remote desktop connection. Okay, so you see here we do have the Logon To dialog box now, so we need to make sure that the domain is specified, and on a domain controller we have no choice but to log on to the domain, and we have the same username and password that we had before. Okay, so we log on here locally as the administrator, and what we're going to do here first is just verify that Active Directory and DNS, everything is working okay at this point right now. Okay, first things first, let's take a look and make sure that Active Directory actually installed correctly. So I'm going to go up to Administrative Tools, and then here you see that we do have the icon for Active Directory users and computers. So if you select this and open it up, you know what we're doing here is just really just poking around a little bit, taking a look. You know, do we have our domain controller? Yep, shows up here. Do our users look like they normally should? Okay, and everything looks okay here. Really, there's no problems with this starting up, no issues. Another thing you want to check out: make sure your database file is present where it should be. So this is going to be done by basically browsing your C drive. So I'm going to go to My Computer, Local Drive C, the Windows System folder. Okay, and this is in the NTDS folder, and within that folder we have the Active Directory database right here, the ntds.dit file. Okay, so this all looks good as well. Our database is showing up here, so it looks like the Active Directory installation process went smoothly. Now let's go take a look at DNS. Okay, one thing we do need to set up here, remember we didn't have DNS completely functional like we wanted before. Okay, so to avoid problems, what we really need to do is take a look at our forward lookup zone, and if we right click this forward lookup zone again and then go down to properties, we see that currently right now it's just a primary zone, okay, and it's not an Active Directory integrated zone. So if I click change here, we have the choice of primary, secondary, a stub zone, which is new to Server 2003, or store the zone in Active Directory. So this checkbox down below effectively makes this an Active Directory integrated zone, and this is what we want to do. Notice that it's only available if the DNS server is a domain controller. So I click OK here and just verify that that's what we want. Okay, now that we've done that, it says data is stored in Active Directory. We can come down to dynamic updates, and now we can get that secure only dynamic updates. Okay, so if we click apply at this point right now, now we see that we have Active Directory integrated zones, and we have secure dynamic updates. This is exactly what we're looking for, so we're happy with this. We can click OK now. Okay, and we're all set here. Now we're going to repeat this process basically here in a reverse lookup zone by doing the exact same thing, just coming in here, going to change, store the zone in Active Directory, and then moving this to secure only as well. Okay, now if I were to refresh this or close my DNS wizard, we'll see that now we get all sorts of new records here, our SRV records, which are necessary for Active Directory and DNS to play nicely together. Okay, and this, we do want to see these SRV records here, so this is a good thing. We have the Kerberos server resource locator record, so we're happy with this. Okay, let's go ahead and close DNS, and we have a couple more things we need to do here in the domain controller, and that's to raise the functional levels of these machines. Okay, now the first thing we're going to do is go over here to Active Directory users and computers, and we have the choice of raising the functional level of this particular domain, sophistoybox.local. Okay, and we talked about this briefly before. Here it is right here. If you right click, you have raise domain functional level. This is the equivalent of mixed mode and native mode in Windows 2000. Well, in Server 2003, by default the functional level is Windows 2000 mixed mode. Okay, so we can move this up to native mode, which will give us all the features of Windows 2000 native mode, but we must have all Windows 2000 and Server 2003 domain controllers, or we can even move it up to Windows Server 2003 domain functional level. Okay, so if I do this, then we can only have Windows Server 2003 domain controllers. Now this is going to give us the most functionality in Server 2003. We're going to go ahead and select this because Sophie's Toy Box Company only has Windows Server 2003 running on their domain controllers. So I just click raise. Warns us right here that this cannot be reversed, so you click OK, and it lets us know that it was raised successfully. Now if I come back here again and go to raise domain functional level, it lets us know that the domain is operating at the highest possible functional level already. Okay? If you have multiple domain controllers, you want to give this some time. Make sure that this replicates over to all the different domain controllers. Okay, but once that's done, your next step in a forest environment is then to raise the forest functional level. And that can be accomplished by going to All Programs, Administrative Tools, and then going to AD, Domains and Trusts. Not users and computers, but domains and trusts. Okay, and then from here you need to right click this top snap in here, right click it and go to raised forest functional level. Now when you look here, we really have just one choice. Okay, and that's because the current level is Windows 2000. If you want to raise this up to Server 2003 forest functional level, just have to click raise here basically. Okay, same warning message, and just like that it was raised successfully. Okay, at this point right now what we've accomplished, we've basically given the Server 2003 Active Directory domain the most functionality, but we can no longer add Windows 2000 or prior domain controllers to the domain. Okay, for right now we're all set on the domain controller. Our next step is going to be to start joining our different computers to this domain. Okay, so what we're going to do right now, we've got this domain controller set up here. Let's go ahead and close this out. And what we'll do at this point, we're going to connect over to our two other machines that we have on the network, XP1 and NAT1, and join them to the domain. Okay, so we're going to go form a remote desktop connection, and we'll first connect over to NAT1. Okay, log on here, and this is just a process I'm sure you're very familiar with, just right-clicking, properties, and then joining the domain here. Okay, now you need to type this stuff in correctly, and if you don't have DNS configured correctly on this machine, you will run into a problem here. But if DNS is set up correctly, you should get this logon box right away, and then you're going to log on with your domain administrator credentials. Okay? Not the local administrator password, but the domain administrator's password. In my case, it's the same right now, but in a lot of cases, it's going to be completely different. Okay, so you're going to get a welcome screen like this. You can click OK all the way out of here and then just reboot the computer. Okay, this just lets us know we had a remote desktop connection over to this machine. Well, of course, if that machine's rebooting, we're no longer going to have that connection. Okay, and really on XP1, it's no different as far as how this is accomplished. So we're just going to log on over here real quick and do this exact same thing. It's just a matter of right-clicking, properties, and this is right-clicking my computer, by the way. Okay, and I knew I typed that in incorrectly there. So just type in your password. Hopefully you type it in correctly. Okay, then once you get that in, it's going to be doing basically the exact same thing. So I'm going to click OK all the way out and then restart the computer. Okay, so what we're going to do now, I'm going to stop this video, wait for those machines to reboot, and then we'll pick up right from there. Okay, XP1 and NAT1 have been joined to the domain and rebooted, and in addition to that, while we were down, went ahead and set up all the Active Directory user accounts, groups, and organizational units, and did some other little housekeeping chores here as well. So you're going to see here in a second, we're going to connect over to Exchange 1, and we're not going to be logging on once again using that domain administrator username and password. Okay, so we've connected over to Exchange 1, and we're going to take a look inside Active Directory at some of the changes that we've actually made. Okay, first off, we set up several different organizational units, okay, and this is exactly how it's set up in the book, so if you have questions you can refer to the diagrams within the lab book, but we have organizational units for the warehouse, sales, operation, managers, and then admins, and then with each one of these organizational units, we've created a certain number of users. Now bear in mind, this is just supposed to be representative of the overall Sophie's Toy Box company network, and it doesn't represent all the different users. Within the computers container here, you see the 3 different machines that we've joined to the network. NAT1 and XP1 are part of our actual video course, and then XP base is where I'm just recording from. Within domain controllers, you see Exchange 1, so we've got our Active Directory machine showing up here. So fairly straightforward on everything that's gone on there. It's by the book. We did do a couple extra things though. Okay, and I want to go over this with you just to give you a feel for how we'll proceed going forward. Now within this admin's organizational unit, did a couple things. The first thing I did is I created a group on my own called Exchange Admins. Okay, and this isn't a requirement, but what this will do is it'll give you a simple way to kind of throw anybody who should be an administrator of Exchange inside this group. Now in larger companies, you may even break this down further and get more granular with your group assignments. You may have Exchange complete or full admins. You may have Exchange junior admins or Exchange view only admins, and you'll kind of see where those terms come into play a little bit later on. So there's different levels of Exchange access you may want to assign as well. Now another thing that I've done here, I created a separate user account for myself. Now I'm acting as the outside consultant to Sophie's Toy Box, so what I want to do is set up my very own user account. So when I come on site to manage this network, I kind of have my own user account to log on with. Now I left this administrator account here, but you'd want to do a couple things with this. You may want to rename this account. Might not be a bad thing to do. You really don't want to just leave it as it is right here. It's just too simple for a hacker or anybody like that to hack in, break in using that account. Okay, so what I've done, I set up this account, and you want to do this for any of your administrators. You don't want to let everybody use this administrator account. But you set up this account and then just join this person to whatever groups they're supposed to be a part of. And because I want to be able to do anything that I need to do within the domain and also on the Exchange server, you can see that my group membership is quite inclusive here. I'm part of the administrators, domain admins, enterprise admins, Exchange admins, that group I just showed you, group policy creators, creator owners, and then schema admins. Okay, part of all those different groups there. And you're not going to need these group memberships all the time, but in a second here we will need the schema admins membership as well as the enterprise admins membership. So that's why I went ahead and put myself within all these groups. In a larger organization, of course, you're going to be using more granular control over who exactly should have what administrative privileges. Okay, so fairly straightforward here. Just created a group. I put it inside this admin's OU. I then created an additional user. I'm a member of this group as well as a lot of the default administrative groups that are created within Server 2003. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and close this down. And we'll go back over to our base system here. And the next thing we're going to take a look at is just what process is next as far as our overall plan is concerned. Okay, because we've really gone through most of the steps here within Active Directory. If we read through here, we've done Server 2003 with all the updates. We've configured DNS. We've installed Active Directory. We built our OU structure. And we upgraded our machines to, it's not native mode anymore, but remember in Windows Server 2003, we now call this forest functional level or domain functional level. So it's referred to as functional levels instead of native or mixed mode. Now when it comes to Exchange Server, what we need to do first, make sure that that machine that's going to be running Exchange Server is running Windows Server 2003 and that it has all the updates just like we saw above. Now in our scenario here, we're actually installing Active Directory and Exchange Server on the same machine, so we've already taken care of this. Remember, as I stressed to you before, it's really, really important in a production environment, you really want to separate the Active Directory domain controller and the Exchange Server. Put them on different machines. Okay, it's going to be a much better configuration. It'll run much smoother, and all of your eggs won't be in one basket as well. When it comes time to Exchange Server, we have some decisions to make. Okay, and one of the first decisions we need to make is which version of Exchange we want to use. Okay, Standard or Enterprise. And we'll take a look. There's not a huge difference between Standard and Enterprise when we're moving from 2000 to 2003. So this is pretty similar if you're familiar with Exchange 2000. Our basic differences, though, come down to this. Okay, Exchange Standard Edition does not feature clustering, while Enterprise Edition will give you up to 8-way clustering. So if you're in a larger organization that requires clustering, you want that fault-tolerant, redundant server type setup, then Exchange Enterprise Edition is going to be the right selection for you. Okay, front-end, back-end servers. Okay, this is the type of thing where you may have a front-end server that's running Exchange 2003, and what you really want to be able to do here is be able to install Exchange Server on this machine and then have that machine act as just the front end, passing all email requests in through the Exchange Server and then back to the back-end server that's actually hosting or holding the mailboxes. Okay, so some smaller organizations probably won't need this feature, but in larger enterprises it's very, very common that on the DMZ or demilitarized zone, you put in one of these front-end servers and that machine's going to be sitting there and it's going to take requests like OWA, Outlook Web Access, any sort of other email requests, and kind of take care of the front-end processing. Okay, next we have storage groups. We haven't talked at all about storage groups at this point right now, but a good way to look at this is just it gives you the ability to kind of divide up your Exchange Server database. Okay, and this is going to be real important in larger organizations. In a smaller organization, you're not real concerned about having multiple storage groups because you just don't have that many mailboxes or that much data that you need to store. Okay, but in a larger organization, you can create up to 4 storage groups, as you see right here, and then hand in hand with that setting are the data stores. Okay, because data stores are created within the storage groups themselves. So for example, here when we're talking about the Enterprise Edition, you can create 4 storage groups, and each one of those storage groups can hold 5 stores. Okay, 5 data stores. So 4 times 5 is 20, so that gives us the ability to create 20 different data stores. Now this is important for fault tolerance, to kind of divide up your mailboxes for different settings. Quicker recovery. If you ever have a disaster situation, you need to recover your mailboxes. If you have all of your mailboxes in one giant database, it can take days or weeks to actually recover that data. That's just not acceptable for most organizations. With Standard Edition, you're limited to 2 stores, one mail store and one public store, and each one of those has a 16 gigabyte data maximum. Now it's a decent amount of space. A smaller organization should be fine, with these limits, but you may be right in between, and you need to consider this before you pick up the Standard Edition. Okay, this is one reason. You may not need all this other stuff that we talked about up here, but just the fact that you need more than 16 gigabytes for your email and public store may be a reason enough for you to go up to the Enterprise Edition. And the last difference is the X.400 connector, which is going to give you the ability to connect to different messaging systems, legacy systems at this point right now. Exchange 2000 and Server 2003 no longer use X.400, but this was utilized in Exchange 5.5, and X.400 is still utilized in some other rival or competitor email messaging systems to Exchange. Okay, so if you need this, you must have the Enterprise Edition because it's included with this. Okay, next let's take a look at the hardware that we're going to be using. Now, fairly basic here, and the reason it's fairly basic is because it really depends a lot upon the organization, the budget, the needs that you have for this Exchange server. But some basic information that's true no matter which type of system you're using is the type of server that you pick up. I definitely recommend that you use some sort of name brand server with excellent technical support. Okay, for me, this is not the right place to use a homemade system or one of these systems that are made by system builders unless you really, really trust this system builder and you've been using them for quite a long time. I prefer to stick with a name brand system, especially when it comes time to get support when you're calling up Microsoft when you run into Exchange server problems. Processing power. Well, I've got down here 2 gigahertz Pentium processor, and it's really very variable. Okay, in a smaller organization, you can get away with less processing power in an Exchange server, but you also may want to have 2 CPUs. It really kind of depends upon how many people and how often they're accessing that Exchange server. Best thing I can tell you if you're buying a new server and you're with a small company, don't chintz out on the processor. I don't think you need to go crazy. Make sure that your server also is going to support expandability going forward. Okay, so maybe you buy a system with 2 sockets in there so you can add an additional CPU if it's necessary. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind, and when you're planning for server hardware, it's a pretty good idea to think 3 years down the road. Okay, 3 years down the road is a pretty good guideline as far as what you're going to need. Try to build this system so you don't need to upgrade it within a year. That can cause downtime, can cause all sorts of instability issues when you're bringing the server down. And who knows if you're going to be able to find the parts that you need at a reasonable price as well a year later. Okay, RAM. When it comes to memory, as much as you can put in there is probably a good idea. Okay, Exchange server is very memory hungry, and it's really going to hog up as much memory as it possibly can consume. So in a smaller organization, a real small organization, you can get away with 512 megabytes of RAM. Although if you're even more than a little busy, I do recommend you start with 1 gigabyte of RAM, and you're probably going to be using more if you're working in a larger environment. And larger, I'm still talking relatively small. If you have 100 mailboxes that are relatively active, you may want to add additional memory to make your Exchange server a little bit peppier. Okay, hard drive space is really hard to judge because a lot of it depends upon your particular organization and how much data you're going to store, how many emails you get on a daily basis, how long are you going to retain these for your users. Okay, and we're going to talk about deletion retention times here coming up pretty quickly, but that's something that is definitely going to factor into how much hard drive space you need. One thing I can recommend though is to invest in hardware RAID solutions and stay away from software RAID solutions. Okay, you also want to separate out your Exchange system files, transaction logs, and your information store. And we're going to take a look at that here in our next slide. And what we're looking at here, we've got a diagram. This is really meant to be inside an Exchange server. Over here on the left, we're looking at 2 different RAID controllers. We have 1 and 2 over here. Sorry about the bad writing here at this pen. But we've got a hardware RAID controller here. It's a SCSI controller. And we have a secondary RAID SCSI controller as well. These are both made by Adaptec, these particular models. There's all sorts of different vendors out there though. On the right hand side we have our physical hard drives, and in this case each one of these boxes represents a physical hard drive. So if you count them up, we have 7 different physical hard drives. These are SCSI hard drives. I'm not telling you this is exactly how you have to set up your Exchange server. In a smaller environment this is probably overkill. Okay, but if you have a little bit of a budget behind you and it's a little bit larger environment, even over 50 users, this is something to seriously consider because it's going to bolster your performance quite a bit. What we're doing here is we're separating out our system files onto a RAID 1 mirror, our transaction logs onto a RAID 1 mirror, and then our data stores, our mailboxes and public folders, we're putting those onto a RAID 5 stripe set with parity. Okay, so all these physical drives, in separating these, what it's doing is just speeding up the whole process and your Exchange server is going to be much more responsive having a configuration such as this. Okay, so this is a recommendation right now. We're not going to spend too much time on this because you really don't have the background yet to understand what transaction logs are or even the mail or public stores. We're going to come back to this slide in a later video and we'll spend a little bit more time on it and talk about how we can separate out these different pieces. Okay, so we've taken care of our updates. We talked about our versions of Exchange. Just got done talking about server hardware and hard drive configuration. Now it's time to actually get on to the Exchange installation and forest prep and domain prep as you see here. Now we have a couple choices. If you're going to be installing Exchange and you're the administrator as I am here, okay, remember when I just showed you that user account a little bit ago, my account was part of the Schema admins group, the enterprise admins group, the domain admins group. I'm basically an organizational wide or a forest wide administrator. In these situations, I can run Exchange server without having to run these two commands we're going to be talking about next, forest prep and domain prep. Okay? However, if you're an Exchange administrator and you aren't a Schema admin or you're not a forest-wide administrator, an enterprise admin, okay, what you're going to have to do is have the people who are in charge of the Schema changes or your enterprise admins, they're going to have to run forest prep for you. Okay, and then a domain administrator is going to have to run domain prep for each different domain that's part of your forest. Okay, so you may or may not have to run these. If you run just the normal Exchange installation process, all this stuff is included within it, provided that you're a Schema admin, enterprise admin, and domain admin of the particular domain that you're working with. Okay, let's connect over to Exchange 1, and we're going to go ahead and run these, show you how exactly this is done. Okay, I just popped in the Exchange 2003 server disk, and what I'm going to go ahead and do, sometimes it won't start by itself, so we'll just double click and open the CD up. Okay, if you double click Setup, this will start off our installation wizard, okay, and it's a real different look than what we saw with Exchange 2000. Now we're going to click over here under Deployment. We see Exchange Deployment Tools. We're going to go ahead and select this. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and maximize this. Now it's asking us exactly what we're trying to do here. Deploy the first Exchange 2003 server, install 2003 and additional servers, post-installation, system management tools only. This is the first Exchange 2003 server. Okay, now it's asking you to describe your current environment. Do we have 5.5, mixed mode with 2000 5.5, only 2000, or a brand new Exchange 2003 installation? Okay, we're not running Exchange right now, so this is exactly what we're going to be doing, so we select this option here. Now this is a kind of cool new feature that I like with Exchange 2003. It's a checklist of all the things that you need to do before you actually install Exchange 2003. Now you don't have to go down and do every single one of these. It is a good idea, I think, though, to go down and take a look at all the different pieces that they've specified on here. Okay, and we're going to go through these and take a look at these. On the server, we need to install 2000 server service pack 3 or later, or server 2003, and this is what we have right here, server 2003. Now one thing we haven't done yet, and we're going to have to do this here in a second, is to install NNTP, SMTP, and the World Wide Web services on this server. Okay, if we're running 2003, we're also going to have to verify that ASP.NET is installed. All of these are required in order to install Exchange 2003. Okay, so we'll look at this setup here in 1 second. Some other things, it's wanting you to run DC Diag to test your domain controller, Net Diag, just a network connectivity tester. Down here below, this actually is having you install the support tools, and then this is running DC Diag and Net Diag in case you got lost by that. This, by the way, these are optional. If you don't do this, it's not going to stop you from doing the installation. However, if your domain controller is not available or network connectivity is not there, you're going to run into problems. Okay? When you get a second, check these tools out. They're pretty easy to use, cool, and they can help you out, save you some time to avoid any problems. Now, steps 6 and 7 are the forest prep and domain prep features that I was talking about before. Now, if I wanted to, I could just click this right here, or if I want to as well, I can specify a path similar to what we did in Windows 2000. I'm going to go ahead and specify run forest prep now here, okay, in a second here, and we'll just install it straight from this Exchange server installation disk. Our last step is to actually install Exchange 2003 by running Exchange Setup. Okay, so let's go ahead and click Run Forest Prep now and get a feel for what's going to happen here. Okay, now you see that it's just copying setup files to a temporary directory, and this process probably is going to take about 15 or 20 minutes before it completes. So once we verify that everything is working here in a second and seems to go as we want, we're just going to kind of let it run on its own. Okay, so this is welcoming us to the installation. We're going to go ahead and step through here. Okay, now we have Forest Prep specified above here. I'm going to click Next. Okay, now this is an important setting right here. It's asking us who the Microsoft Exchange Server Administrator account should be. Okay, and I'm logged on right now with my user account that I set up. So I could go ahead and use it if I wanted to. But instead of doing that, what I'd like to do is use that Exchange admins group. Okay, remember, if you're using a group, it's much simpler to give somebody full Exchange access to the organization by just making them a member of a group. So I'm going to go ahead and backspace over this and type in here Exchange admins, my self-made group here. I'm going to click Next. Okay, couldn't validate this. Let's see here if I spelled it correctly. Exchange admins, and then we're going to go ahead and check in Active Directory, make sure I spelled that correctly as well. Okay, what I did here is I put a space in, so we're going to have to add that space just like we did there. So let's go ahead and go back to the installation. Okay, and now it took that fine. It's going through the Forest Prep process. Okay, this is going to take some time, could take 20 to 30 minutes actually, so I'm going to let this run on its own. I'm going to stop this video, and then once it's complete, we'll start it right back up again and continue. Okay, Forest Prep has completed on Exchange 1, so what we're going to do now is just finish this off, and now we're just going to go right back in here again, and we're going to run domain prep on this same domain. So we're just going to be going through and doing the exact same choices. Okay, and then down here at the bottom again, now we're choosing Run Domain Prep. Okay, and this is going to take us through a similar screen to what we just saw. This won't take nearly as long as Forest Prep does. Should only take usually less than 5 minutes for Domain Prep to run. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go through this installation process once again. And keep in mind, like I said, if you're a full-blown administrator of the entire enterprise, you don't even have to do this. You can just do a installation, and Forest Prep and Domain Prep are both included within that installation. Okay, so we click Next, and it's off and running here once again. Okay, now this is normal right here. We get an error message. The domain has been identified as an insecure domain for mail-enabled groups with hidden DL membership. Okay, we can forget about this right now. It's not an issue. We'll talk about this a little bit later on in this video. Okay, I'm going to stop this video and we'll start it right back up again as soon as the process has completed. It's completed, so now we can just continue right on. Okay, so I click Finish here, and like I told you before, it's much, much quicker to actually run this than it is the Forest Prep tool. Okay, so now what we have left to do is actually just install Exchange Server, but before we do that, we need to go back and take a look at exactly what we need to install before we could install Exchange. Okay, and what I'm referring to is up here. Remember, we need to verify that we're installing NNTP, SMTP, World Wide Web Services, and also ASP.NET. Let's go take a look at how we can do this. So I'm going to close this. And we first need to get into Control Panel and Add or Remove Programs. Then we're going to go to Add Remove Windows Components. Okay, and in Server 2003, Internet Information Services is no longer in the same location. So it's also a little bit tricky once we get there. So let's take a close look at this. It's now located under Application Server. So go ahead and select Application Server and then click Details. Now what I was referring to here is ASP.NET. This has to be installed. So I'm going to go ahead and select this. And notice when I select this, it also selects Network COM Plus Access, as well as checking Internet Information Services. But it has checked it. It did not install everything. We got a gray background here indicating that not everything beneath this has been installed. So I'm going to click this Internet Information Services and then click Details. Now when I look in here, let's take a look at what we have and what we don't have. Well, we have common files, which are necessary, Internet Information Services Manager. This is how stuff is managed, so we need that. World Wide Web Service, which is great because we're going to install that anyway. Now what we have left, we need to install this SMTP service, the NNTP service, and that's really all that we need here. If you look at the other stuff, we don't need FTP, we don't need internet printing, bits is not required. Okay, what we do want to do though, take a look at any of these. If we select World Wide Web Services, we can actually get even more granular and take a look at more details here. Okay, we're not going to drill down, we don't need to get into this other stuff here, but as part of the security initiative, Microsoft has really gotten a lot more granular with what you can install and not install. Okay, and by default, looking at this, all this stuff is actually turned off. Okay, so we're going to leave it that way. Okay, if you go to SMTP or NNTP, same thing here. If you drill down on these, some of them have additional components, some of them don't. Okay, so we're going to click OK all the way out here, and then click Next to actually install these pieces. Now this is probably going to require the CD, and it'll take 5 to 10 minutes or so to install, so we'll stop the video now, and when this is finished up, I'm going to reboot the computer, and before I reboot the computer, or before we restart, I'm just going to go ahead and reboot the computer so that's taken care of. Okay, so I'm going to stop this video now and then pop in the CD. Okay, Exchange 1 has rebooted. So finally, we're actually ready to install Exchange Server 2003. Now we've installed and ran Forest Prep, Domain Prep, we've installed Internet Information Services, NNTP, SMTP, ASP.NET, but all of this stuff has to be done before we can run Exchange Server 2003. Let's go ahead and connect over to Exchange 1 right now. Okay, and what we're going to do here is just double click this CD, and we're going to go right back into the setup just as we saw before. Okay, so we're right back in setup. We're going to go to Exchange Deployment Tools. We're going to go down to the bottom here and choose Deploy the first Exchange server and then New Exchange 2003 installation. Okay, so if we're going to get into the checkbox frenzy here, we could start checking these off. We didn't actually do this, but feel pretty confident at this point that our network and domain are in place. We've run Forest Prep, Domain Prep, and then finally down here at the bottom, we're ready to run setup. Okay, and you don't have to click this icon here. You could do this from a command prompt as well, but it's here. Let's go ahead and do it. Okay, so I click Run Setup Now, and it's going to start the installation process of Exchange 2003. So a lot of this is going to be just like we saw already. It's going to open up the exact same installation opening screen that we saw before. So we'll give this a second to open up, and then within a couple minutes we'll be off and running. So we can click Next past the welcome screen, agree to the EULA if you indeed agree. Okay, and right here we actually have the ability to change this if we want to. If for some reason we want to install one of these other connectors or the 5.5 administrator, we can come up here to custom, and now we have the ability to actually install some of these other pieces. Okay, that's not what I'm looking to do though. I want a typical install, so I'm going to go ahead and click typical here, and notice that that went away. Lotus Notes is no longer going to be installed. I'm going to click Next. Okay, create a new Exchange organization because we don't have one at this point right now. And here's where you get to type in your organization name. And best to keep this as short as possible. You want no punctuation in here. So we're just going to leave this at Sophie's Toy Box Company. Okay, no punctuation. This is, in all honesty, probably a little bit too long. We could just make this Sophie's and we'd probably be okay. So let's just click Next. We're going to agree to the licensing. Okay, and now we see a installation summary. We can click Next, and the installation process is off and running. Okay, now since we ran Forest Prep and Domain Prep ahead of time, it's not going to take nearly as long as it normally does. So you can expect this to take about 10 minutes or so, and then we should be all set and ready to go. I'm going to stop the video, and we'll pick this up again as soon as Exchange is installed. Okay, Exchange 2003 has now been installed over on Exchange 1. So what we're going to do is just a couple other maintenance tasks here, and if we take a look at our checklist, we still need to install our service packs and security fixes. And currently with Exchange 2003, Service Pack 1 exists. We're going to install that as well as a couple hot fixes that I'll do offline. We also need to decide whether or not Exchange Server is going to be put into native mode or not, and this is different than Active Directory native mode. This is something we're going to put off until the next video, however, so we'll take a look at this first thing in the next video. Okay, that's going to be in video 2. So we're going to take a look at the service pack, how to install that in 1 second. But before we do that, last thing we want to look at is something called the 3 gigabyte switch. Okay, and we talked about this in the Exchange 2000 videos, and this was prevalent in Exchange 2000 as well. But this is the actual switch that's added to the boot.ini file. Now this is necessary to optimize the virtual memory usage of the information store, as you see right here. What can happen if you don't use this switch? It can actually bog down your Exchange server and cause it to crash. Okay, so it's real important that we add this switch on any machine that has 1 gigabyte or more of physical random access memory, or RAM. Okay, so this machine that I'm working on, for example, is running Exchange 2003, and it's a Windows 2003 machine, and it has 1 gigabyte of memory. So what I want to do is actually add this switch to the boot.ini file. I'll show you how to do that in a second. Now you want to do this on any Exchange 2003 machine, whether it's enterprise or standard, provided that it's running on Windows Server 2003, as you see right here. Okay, if it's Exchange 2003 on Windows 2000 Server, don't bother with this switch. Okay, also, if you have less than 1 gigabyte of memory, you don't need this switch either. So the last instance where you don't want to run this is in a case where you have a front-end Exchange server. Okay, and we talked about this briefly, but a front-end Exchange server basically is there to filter the emails that comes into your organization. It doesn't store any email actually on that server. In situations like that, you don't want to run this switch either. Okay, and lastly, because I don't expect you to remember all of this just off the top of your head, refer to this article ID right here on Microsoft's website. You can even do a Google search for article ID 823440, and you're going to find information pertaining to what we're talking about here. Okay, so we're going to add this switch to the boot.ini file, as well as this switch, which is a new switch in Exchange 2003. It's really just going one step further than what the 3 gigabyte switch does, and just gets more granular with the memory optimization. Okay, let's go ahead and connect over to Exchange 2003 or Exchange 1, and we're going to go ahead and add these switches to our boot.ini file. Okay, to get there, we're going to go to My Computer, go to the C drive, and the boot.ini file typically is going to be located right at the root of your C drive. Now we need to actually enable, we have hidden files and folders enabled. We also need to deselect this hide protected operating system files choice. Now when we do this, we see that the boot.ini file shows up. If I open this up, here's the actual piece that I need to modify here. And I'm going to go all the way to the very end where it says fast detect, put a space in here, and my first switch is going to be this 3 gigabyte switch. Another space, /, and here's where I'm adding the USERVA, okay, and then it's equals 3030. Okay, let's just double check this. / 3 gigabytes, space, / user VA equals 3030. Okay, that's what we need. So what we're going to do is go ahead and save this. Okay, close the file, and now that's been saved in the boot.ini file. Now this is going to do nothing for us until the next time we actually boot up. No big deal right now. We have nothing on this Exchange server, no mailbox stores or anything, so it's not going to pose a problem for us at this point in time. Now last thing we're going to do in this video is just briefly go through the installation of the service pack. I won't have you sit through and wait till the end of it, but just to let you know that it has to be done. First, you have to download the service pack from Microsoft's website. Currently, as I said before, Service Pack 1 exists. Now, I've already downloaded the service pack and extracted it here locally, and it's been extracted to this Exchange 2003 Service Pack 1 English folder. If I open this up here, I see that I have a couple different folders here. I'm going to go into the Setup folder, i386, and then just browse down here to my update.exe file. Okay, so it's going to take a couple seconds to bring this up, and this is going to be real similar to what we looked at before. Okay, and you can see right here we're going to be installing Service Pack 1 for Exchange 2003. Okay, so we're just going to go through exactly what we normally go through. At this point in time, we're not going to be changing anything. It's just strictly an update to our current components. Okay, so now one thing that we do see here when we're going through this, try to update this, and this is important to note, the Microsoft Exchange messaging and collaboration services cannot be assigned the action update because we need to install this hotfix here. Article 831.464 has not been installed. Okay, so this is necessary for Outlook Web Access. We're going to be using this, so we talk about this in the lab book as well. We definitely want to download this. So the easiest way to pick this up, I'm just going to remember this number, 831.464. Okay, and then we would typically just connect out to the internet, but we don't have internet access here. So I'm going to download this update, put it onto the actual computer here, and just show you what it looks like here in 1 second. Okay, the fix has been downloaded, just a small little 450 or so kilobyte fix, 431. So we just have to install this. You'll see right here that it's real simple, doesn't take long at all to install. And then once we do this, we can go ahead and go through that Exchange Service Pack 1 installation like we were talking about a second ago. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go to my computer and actually get this ready. Okay, see that it's finished here, so I'll click Finish, and now I've just opened up my Service Pack folder here once again. I'm going to browse down to Update, and then go ahead and update this Service Pack. So next, agree to the licensing agreement. Okay, and this is where we got stuck before. Now we see Update here, and the Next button is enabled. So I can click Next here, and now I have my installation summary, my choices. I click Next, and the process is going to be off and running. Okay, it doesn't take too long. We're talking about another 10 minutes or so before this is done. So I'm going to stop this video, and we'll pick it up again just to confirm that everything went okay as soon as this is completed. Okay, Exchange 1 has been updated with Service Pack 1 as well as the latest hotfixes. So Exchange 1 is all set and ready to go with Exchange 2003. That wraps up Video 1. We'll see you back here real soon when we go into Video 2 and start the nuts and bolts of Exchange Server 2003.